And let us pray. On this beautiful morning, eternal God, you promise eternal life to all those who believe. Grant us grace in believing when questions and doubts assail us. Nourish us with your living bread of love, that we might share that with the lost and be raised with you. Keep us faithful to your gospel, for you are alive and reign with the Father in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
And I'm just going to excuse myself for 1 second because I have a dog trying to come in the room. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Where's Jackie, Chuck?
Jackie is making breakfast, Donna.
Oh, okay.
We always get a slow start when we fly down here. It doesn't seem like it, but it always happens. She is, and she can hear everything, so
Okay,
she is with us.
that's good.
Hello, Jackie. Take her breakfast.
Yes.
All right.
Patty, before we start, I did a little reading ahead.
Uh-huh.
And we start with a period of a question that I think is really worth considering seriously. That is, why are these people worshiping God?
Well, let's ask her. That's a great question.
And as we think about that, we might also think about why we gather every Sunday, which really has only downside for you because you're not going to convince anybody here that they should be gathered. We're already gathering, but it might convince somebody they don't need to.
Hey, Jackie.
Good morning.
It's good to have
there
a goal
she is.
for it.
It is good to have a goal and, to be intentionally aware of what you're doing.
Well,
I had a similar question come up to Fred's, but wrapped in a different package. But as we go through this, and we know the story, I said, how would I explain this if one of my unchurched grandchildren says, "What's this Job story about?" Why is that
relevant,
worth reading, much less important?
Good. Well, I look forward to hearing your answer.
I don't have an answer to that yet, but I think I do.
Well, Fred will give you one.
I'm
I
sure.
have a question of my own this morning that I'd love for us to think about for a couple of seconds or more. It's not a small question, but it's one that is hinted at least as we move into chapter 35. And my question is this: when we sin, who is hurt by that?
Depends on what sin it is.
Okay.
If it's
murder,
That's pretty binary.
or even being, rude to somebody. There's.
I am reminded of what that Buddhist saying that, when somebody, what wrong somebody does to you is his karma, but how you react is your karma.
Yeah.
Ray, what's the clock say?
8 minutes.
There you go. Okay, so
there was a meme. There is a meme in response directly to that question that is a little glib, but it goes something like, God does not punish us for our sins punish us. And living with a sin you have done is punishment.
So that's just a part of our DNA that, that's the way we're built.
I don't think so. I mean, what was it, Genghis Khan that said there's no greater pleasure than, wiping your enemy's blood off your sword and then running off with his woman?
Well, they're always
the barbarian said that.
Yeah.
What you said? I'm sorry, Chuck. I couldn't hear what you said.
There are always going to be exceptions, and for whatever reason, maybe that chromosome or whatever didn't get placed right or didn't fold right or whatever. So Genghis Khan and serial killers and people like that have different makeup, but by and large, I think the human species is guilty when they sin. They feel it themselves.
Mhm, mhm.
Whether they admit it or not, it's a different thing.
Ah, really good.
To
distinction.
themselves or anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Or in the moment.
Yes.
Well, so much of it is cultural, though, in the in the stands. Killing a stranger is not really considered that much of a sin. He's walking by, you can knife him, but if he shows up at your door and asks for refuge, then you'd be being rude to a guest.
Mm.
And
Okay.
that would be a cardinal sin. So the question is, can he make it to your door before you shoot him?
Yeah.
Well, given that we're not in the stands and we're in Bethesda and Germany and Oklahoma and Alexandria, when we sin, and I'm going to argue we do that all the time, and anyone who says, oh, I haven't sinned today is either
Still in bed.
still in bed, she's deluding him or herself, any of the above. But when we sin, so obviously there are sins that hurt the other people, the other person. If we do, Fred used the example of murder, obviously, right? Betrayal, being rude to another person. There's that direct hurt. Is God hurt by our sin? And if so, how? Boy, do I know how to kill a conversation. This is
Well,
It's like wearing your collar into a bar.
exactly. Exactly.
The question is he hurt or is he disappointed by our sin?
Okay,
Yeah.
so what do you think, John?
I think he is disappointed by our sin, but I don't think he feels a hurt. I think is eternally optimistic and hopeful that we will get better.
I
But he's
think
also
that
probably not surprised.
that is the question that's asked, by Elihu.
So hold that thought. That's why I'm asking this. So, Ellie, what were you saying about God not being surprised?
Oh, he's not hurt by our sin, but he is disappointed. I should imagine, I'm not putting ideas in God's mind, but yeah, he knows that we're made of dust, and is probably, I mean, it's like a child. You're pleased when they do well, and but not surprised when they knock over the milk.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But disappointed when they lie about it, right? Okay. Is it possible for humans to wound God?
By denying it, I guess.
I would say
Intuitively,
no.
I don't think so. And I would have a hard time logicking that through, but I don't
Yeah.
think so.
I agree.
And Fred, you said you don't think so either.
Nope.
Great. Okay. Well, that's very helpful as we get started with chapter 35, because as Fred said, this is exactly the question that is going to be posed at the beginning of this chapter. And I'm just going to be aspirational and put my hope out there. Last week, we read 3 chapters of Job. If we could do that today, then that sets us up next week for God to hear and start speaking. I don't know if we'll get there, but I'm just putting that out there. So would somebody like to read chapter 35 for us? And it's not long. It's only 16 verses.
Sure.
Go
How
for
about
it.
Okay.
Whoever said yes, go for it.
Then Elihu said, do you think this is just? You say, I am in the right, not God. Yet you ask him, what profit is it to me, and what do I gain by not sinning? I would like to reply to you and to your friends with you. Look up at the heavens and see. Gaze at the clouds so high above you. If you sin, how does that affect him? If your sins are many, what does that do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give him, or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness only affects people like yourself, and your righteousness only other people. People cry out under a load of oppression, then plead for relief from the arm of the powerful. But no one says, "Where is God, my maker, who gives us songs in the night, who teaches us more than he teaches the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the sky?" He does not answer when people cry out because of the arrogance of the wicked. Indeed, God does not listen to your empty plea. The Almighty pays no attention to it. How much less then will he listen when you say that you do not see him, that your case is before him and you must wait for him, and further that his anger never punishes and he does not take the least notice of wickedness. So Job opens his mouth with empty talk. Without knowledge, he multiplies words.
Thank you. So what's Elihu's argument here? And do you buy it?
That we do not affect God would be the first part of his statement.
Mhm.
Patty, can you scroll that down a little bit more?
Sure.
Because the discrepancy between Fred's translation and this got me really confused in that second half there.
Is there a particular verse you'd like us to look at in the Hebrew? Not that that might help, but it might.
No, I was listening to one set of words and reading another set and didn't really grok both of them. So let me- give me a sec.
I don't understand starting at about 9. You know, there seem to be a lot of non sequiturs in here.
Mhm.
People cry out under a load of oppression. They plead for relief from the arm of the powerful, but no one says, "Where is God, my maker, who gives songs in the night?"
Or
Gives
strength.
protection by night.
Yeah.
And I
But I
think that's
mean,
what Job has been asking all along, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
but you know, they are saying when they cry out, when they plead for relief, they are saying, "Where is God, my maker?"
And certainly Job has been saying that all along.
Yeah. I mean, you know, what he seems to be saying is, you know, you've gotten so much from God, you know, you should be happy with what you have.
Do you want to hear the summary in my Bible?
Please.
Yes.
Notes?
I've got a dog losing his mind, so I'm just going to stay on mute.
Okay. The absence of a response from God does not mean that God cares nothing about humans, as Job claimed. God responds to the cries of the oppressed only if they deserve justice, for being oppressed is no proof of innocence, and crying out in pain is not the same as crying to God for deliverance. Now, I found that part hard
That's
too,
interesting.
so at least, this is what some scholar thinks it's saying.
Well, those make sense.
I mean, I don't like he does not answer when people, verse 12, when he does not answer when people cry out because of the arrogance of the wicked.
Let's look at that in the Hebrew. Maybe that'll give us some illumination. It may not, but there they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evil men.
In the New English version, it comes out, so when they cry out, he does not answer because they are self-willed and proud.
Okay, so that he is connecting the people who are crying out with the people who are proud and wicked.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
connection is not made in my translation.
The other verse that struck me was, Fred, could you read your verse 2 again?
Sure. do you think this is just? You say, I am in the right, not God.
Aha, yes. So the New Revised Standard says I right before God. Let's see what the, because that is a vast discrepancy. My righteousness is more than God's. Okay, yet another subtle difference. That's a comparison. So what is Elihu's argument here?
Well, let me, before we go on, just one thing that struck me is, I can relate to God doesn't care about our sins or whatever. But in 7, where he talks about, if you are righteous, what do you give him and what does he receive from your hand? I keep thinking about what we say from mine own have we given you every Sunday in terms of adoration and worship.
Gratitude.
Mhm. And if God isn't affected by our wrongdoing, why then would God expect us to give something back to God? Yeah, to me, there's a logical disconnect there.
And particularly if the righteousness affects other humans, yes, if you are righteous and take care of the poor and do things, you will affect, but in a good way.
Yes,
At least that's.
absolutely.
I don't,
Some of the
think I could
connection
take-
here, gets back to the earlier, the idea of sacrifice,
Mhm.
and I think that's a very human concept. If you want something, you have to give up something.
That quid pro quo, right? I'll do
And I
this.
think
you should do
Jesus
this.
broke that, at least in term, Jesus's lessons, parables were generally that sacrifice was not required by God,
Yep, he turns that whole system on its head.
which, means a lot of animals would have had a somewhat longer and perhaps happier life.
Mhm. But to a point that I think you made last week or the week before, Fred, and we've all talked about it at one point or another, that it's so difficult for us to read this outside of our lens as Christians, right? Because so we approach this, that it's not a quid pro quo, exactly what you just said. So I think that's one of the challenges I'll only speak for myself in reading Job, is that I can't immerse myself in this worldview because it's so in opposition to my belief in the teachings and example of Jesus. Here comes Elin.
Hmm.
There she is.
Well, that
It
gets
comes-
back to my question of why are these people worshiping God? Is it
Mhm.
only because it's what's in it for them?
Great question. Elin, how are you? Before we answer that question, how are you this morning, Elin?
Okay, sorry, I've just been dealing with an emergency. I can't finish it, so, okay. I'll get on with it later.
Are you okay?
I'm okay, but it's one of my children.
Oh,
Oh,
okay. Maybe you and I can chat for a couple minutes at the end of this. I want to know what's going on.
Thanks.
Okay. So Fred's question is, I think, really interesting and worth pursuing. Why in the world did these people,
No, yeah, okay.
Job's day, worship God? Why would they do that?
Yeah, we'll see the text.
Why would the people in Job's time or our time?
Well, the first question Fred asked was in Job's time.
Well, in Job's time, it's transactional. I get good people get good things, and bad people, the wicked, get their comeuppance.
But Elihu seems to be calling that into question. And
Mhm.
I think one of the bumper stickers saying is you can't manipulate God and make God do what you want. But I do think I would take it to just another level of abstraction. We say we give you from your own hand, are we giving you? It is an acknowledgement of the power of creation, the power of even the distance of the Almighty. We are not manipulating. We cannot manipulate. but we can acknowledge that there is something greater, even if we can't
Control it.
understand it entirely.
Mhm.
And I would think that that applies here too. I think that's underneath this, that
Mhm.
we worship because we're wired to do that in one way of looking at it.
I firmly
And-
believe that.
I have often thought raising that house full of rambunctious kids, I mean, I take them to church and I say, if nothing else, it is good to have them see their parents at least giving a bow when the processional cross goes by, to say there is something greater than I,
Mhm.
and I know it.
Mhm.
And that's very personal, but that's the direction I'm going with this.
Oh, what has struck me was when they were talking about I gave to the poor, I didn't mistreat the widow. There was never any thought that this is worthwhile in its own right.
Mhm.
It was more of, God will look at me or punish me if I don't.
And there's that transactional worldview again, which is, problematized throughout the book of Job. But absolutely, it's like I better, and going back to the very beginning, when Job made sacrifices just in case his kids had done something wrong, he wanted them to be covered, right? That was his insurance for them. A little did a whole lot of good, right? So yeah, so this question of quid pro quo, of transaction, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, gets
If you look
exposed.
at the Psalms and the prophets, God is pleased with, when you do this, and, but for every time they mention that, there is this fear God and do right or else.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. So going back to my question, so what is Elihu's point here in his refutation of Job? Remember, he's been eavesdropping all along for 30 or 30 plus chapters, listening to the other guys, listening to Job. And so finally he steps forward to speak. I've got some things on my mind, and he speaks with such assurance and confidence that he speaks the truth, right? So what's his point? And do we agree with it?
It seems to be the same as the other friends, that just because you are oppressed doesn't mean that you're in the right and you're innocent. So, I mean, he seems to be laying it back on Job again. You're misled or about your own innocence. You're not as innocent as you thought.
Mhm.
I like
Also,
verse 15. Oh, excuse me.
I'm hearing him say that telling Job that he can't affect what God thinks anyway. That
Bingo.
yeah,
I like, and well, my translation is verse 14, 15. Humble yourself in his presence and wait for his word. But now, because God does not grow angry and punish, and because he lets folly pass unheeded, what Job is doing is just windy nonsense.
Mhm.
Mhm.
God's nature is not to pay attention to those arguments, according to this part of Elihu. Our students in Africa used to say that we are sins that just annoy God. They're not mortal.
You're just like the bug on you, the fly swarming.
Ah,
Yeah, the
I
mosquito.
just,
there he goes again.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me because Job has said all along, that God's waiting around every corner for him to screw up. And, it's so this idea that God's almost out to get him, right? And then he says that he wants a redeemer, not Jesus, but Christians often contort that verse to make it sound like Job is talking about Jesus. He's clearly not talking about Jesus, but I'm looking for a redeemer, an advocate to stand up for me. And Elihu is saying, God's not listening when you say the case is before God and you're waiting for God to respond. It's like, come on. You've got you're looking at it from the wrong point of view. Donna, were you going to say something?
No, sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure. Anything else about 35 before we move on? Okay, let's see what Elihu has to say in 36. Okay. And this is a little longer. Would someone like to read chapter 36 or a portion thereof?
There's a breaking point at 23. I'll be happy to read through 23.
Perfect. And then maybe someone else can pick up at 24. Perfect. Thanks, John.
Okay. Elihu continued and said, bear with me a little, and I will show you, for I have yet something to say on God's behalf. I will bring my knowledge from far away and ascribe righteousness to my Maker. For truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you.
Well,
Oh, there you go.
A young man speaking.
The arrogance of
I
youth.
should just stop right there.
I think I'm just going to use that as the invocation to all my sermons from now on. One who is knowledge is with you. Sorry, go ahead, John.
All right, surely God is mighty and does not despise any. He is mighty in strength of understanding. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their right. He does not withdraw his eyes from the righteous, but with kings on the throne, he sets them forever, and they are exalted. And if they are bound in fetters and caught in the cords of affliction, then he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they are behaving arrogantly. He opens their ears to instruction and commands that they return from iniquity. If they listen and serve him, they complete their days in prosperity and their years in pleasantness. But if they do not listen, they shall perish by the sword and die without knowledge. The godless in heart cherish anger. They do not cry for help when he minds them. They die in their youth, and their life ends in shame. He delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ear by adversity. He also allured you out of distress into a broad place where there is no constraint, and what was set on your table was full of fatness. But you are obsessed with the case of the wicked. Judgment and justice seize you. Beware that wrath does not entice you into scoffing, and do not let the greatness of the ransom turn you aside. Will your cry avail to keep you from distress, or will all the force of your strength? Do not long for the night, when peoples are cut off in their place. Beware, do not turn to iniquity. Because of that, you have been tried by affliction. See, God is exalted in his power. Who is a teacher like him? Who has prescribed for him his way? Or who can say, you have done wrong?
Thank you, John. Should we talk about those verses first and move on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's okay. All right, what do you hear?
I hear the same old transactional stuff that if you're good, you'll be great. If you're bad, you will be cut off. And
Well,
not much
he
beyond
does
that.
give the afflicted their right. He does not keep the wicked alive. So there's some notion of justice in there.
If they're bound in fetters and caught in the cords of affliction, then he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they are behaving arrogantly. So does affliction equal arrogance? You know, is it not equal, but does it flow from arrogance? Is that what he's saying?
I think affliction is the fact that shows that you've been doing it wrong.
Mhm.
You know, it's the
Well, and
same. God is watching.
And if you're righteous, you're a king for you. You're on the throne forever and you're exalted. So, you know, it's the flip side of the two.
Yeah, you can't get away from it. There was that used to be a joke about Catholic schools that they would have, you know, a cafeteria line, and there would be apples at the front, and it would say, "Take only one, God is watching." And you got to the end, and there were cookies, and somebody had written a sign that says, "Take all you want, God is watching the apples."
That's good.
Well, that's very
So, I mean, there is the idea, God is there, you know, he's watching everything and he's balancing out, you get what you deserve.
My question is looking at 8 and 9, is it God according to Elihu? Okay, so let's frame it that way. According to Elihu, is it God punishing their arrogance, or is it something else? If they're bound in fetters and caught in the cords of affliction, then he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they are behaving arrogantly. Is it God punishing them, or
Well,
what?
he's explaining to them that, yes, you are afflicted, and that's because you were bad.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But did God cause the affliction? According to Elihu.
He's not
What's
saying
here
that. I don't
in
think.
this-
It's not
Yeah.
explicit.
Exactly, exactly. And it's, I'm thinking about in the last chapter when Elihu says, you know, God doesn't care. It's no skin off God's nose if you screw up. You're only hurting yourselves. You know, is it that is Elihu saying that this affliction comes as a result of human behavior, but it's not wrought by God? It's, you know, part of the natural, going back to what Chuck said at the very beginning, you know, something in our DNA, something about the fallenness of creation. Is it that that's the natural consequence? That's a question, not a statement. So I would love to
Well,
hear your thoughts.
And he goes on and says that the afflicted, if he opens their ears and gets them to turn around and listen, hey, you will have prosperity again. So it's almost like saying, Job, you got to admit that you did wrong, Job, and everything will be okay. I think, and some of the other people said the same thing, I think.
Mhm.
Mhm.
For 36 chapters, we've been having this conversation.
The same theology.
It,
But I think you bring
Your
up an
problem,
interesting,
deal with it.
But if Elihu thinks this way, why does he make a statement as in verse 4? I read that verse 4 differently.
Oh, good.
The one
How
who
do
is perfect in knowledge is with you. That's God, not
Uh-huh.
Elihu.
I was wondering about that.
the problem is they don't capitalize God
Mm.
in
Well,
this.
he-
Yeah, the one. Mm.
If they'd capitalize the O in one, we would know the difference.
Yeah. Mm.
Let's see what the Hebrew says there. If again, it may not illuminate it. Yeah, see, okay.
There's
My
capital.
words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge
There
is
is a capital one.
um and perfect in terms of completion. And if only God is fully complete, then perhaps that is God. It's just that's an interesting juxtaposition, right? For truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you. It's easy to interpret it that way. Because in verse 3, he refers to his knowledge as well. I would bring my knowledge from far away. So if Elihu is saying that God is with you, does that change the way we read this at all? I'm so glad you said that, Elon.
I think the
But
language
did you
was-
notice there was a capital O in that one that you looked up?
In the Hebrew version, it was one. Yeah, it could be say, look, I'm telling you something on God's behalf. The knowledge I have comes from far away, i.e. God. And that these are not my words, but God's words.
Mhm,
The righteousness is from his maker.
mhm, mhm. Ray, were you going to say something a second ago?
the translation I'm working with, the New English, really misses that point, and it puts it back on Elihu entirely.
Mm,
I search far and wide to support my conclusions. As I defend the maker, the justice of my maker, there are no flaws in my reasoning. Before you stands one whose conclusions, based on the evidence, are sound. That's this translation, and it's completely opposite of what the point Elon is making.
hmm.
Interesting.
And again, let's just, and this sounds like a cop out, maybe it is. And, we know that the Hebrew in Job is particularly challenging. And so it's not surprising to me that we have these really vastly different interpretations of the same text.
But I think one of the things that I think I see in the passage, the longer passage, is the God's role in Elihu's eyes shifts from, we're having trash truck races out here, shifts from being the punisher or the actuator of punishment to one of being teacher from experience. You were arrogant, you experienced punishment, I am teaching you. That, I don't know if that's profound or false or what, but that's what the language in this translation at least leads to.
Mhm.
Well, there is still that assumption that it's your own fault.
Sure.
We may have covered this, but how do you read this phrase where he says he will fetch his knowledge from afar? How do you read that?
Let's see what the Hebrew says, because I think that's pretty ambiguous as well.
It is very ambiguous.
Let's start with fetch. Lift, bear up, carry. Okay.
And this is a King James version.
And the afar is remote, distant lands. So when he says, I will fetch, I will bring, I will carry my knowledge from distant lands. What's he saying there? Anybody have?
So, this translation was, I will search far and wide to support my conclusions. Now, he doesn't say he's going to test his conclusions against the evidence.
No.
No.
Where did we establish that Elihu was from?
He is a distant descendant of Abraham's brother. So he's part of the family of Abraham, which,
Is he saying that he himself is coming from far away? Because, I mean,
he's not from these parts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question.
Hmm.
I'm looking at a different translation
He's a
here.
consultant.
Well, prophets always come from foreign lands.
Yeah.
I love that. He's a consultant.
Hmm,
Sitting next to a consultant, I can say that.
hmm.
That's the secret, doesn't he?
I have to show you this. We're using one of my mother's Bibles. Can you see all the tape that's holding it
Oh.
together?
I love that, Jackie.
Mm.
It's the King James
Oh, yeah.
version printed in the UK.
Oh, I love that.
Mm.
That
It's
is,
gotta be pure.
well, yeah. Is it autographed by God? That's the
Well,
No, but by King James.
by King James.
Oh.
Is that the next best?
That's it.
It's next best.
Yeah, I've got one of those too. My grandmother's.
Oh.
I think it's hard to judge what the meaning is, whether the guy came from far away or God's far away. I keep thinking of poor little Mexico, so far from God, so close to the US.
Yes.
Hmm.
Hmm. Here's just a couple of thoughts from this commentator, John Goldingay. While Elihu has a young man's boorishness, indeed, he is not totally deluded when he claims to offer insight that the friends lack. And his talk about God's following us and watching us, to use that other young man's words, when we fall into wrongdoing is worth reflection. Job has spoken of God's creation of him as an expression of God's commitment, of God's love, but he can't see any commitment or love in the way God is relating to him now. He has spoken of the way God then watched over him, and he knows God is still watching over him, but it now seems a negative kind of watching. Elihu knows of the truth expressed in 2 Peter, that God doesn't want anyone to perish, but wants everyone to come to repentance. Elihu knows that God watches over us like a father or mother who is more interested in seeing us pull back from wrongful styles of life than in chastising us for continuing to be involved in them. Admittedly, God is also willing to go in for chastisement if necessary. God is also like a master who has an interest in whether we're doing the jobs he wants done, a sovereign who has an interest in our loyalty and commitment, or a teacher who has an interest in the students taking notice of what the teacher said. Elihu is not concerned here with outrageously wicked people, the people he calls the impious, who don't cry out to God when trouble comes to them, who are storing up divine wrath for themselves. He's concerned with people who belong to the ranks of the faithful, but who fall to some particular wrongdoing. He speaks of them as the lowly. They are ordinary people without power. People who are lowly in this objective sense may not be lowly in the sense of meek, though it can happen. Similarly, people in positions of power may not also be proud, but it's hard to be both powerful and meek. So faithful people can act big, and God may thus need to pull them down from their exaltation. But God does not simply destroy them. God opens their ear to draw them back to listening and serving, the submissive attitude to God and to other people that is involved in a lowliness that makes meekness of attitude and not merely powerlessness in society. Well, I don't know if that helps or not, but that's another commentator's view. So is God about course correction or punishment or both? And I think I froze. Let's see.
Well, I think God, in the earlier things, God was pretty much expected to reward good behavior.
Mhm.
And Elihu is dealing with the issue directly with the issue of Job is, when the rewards aren't there, what
Mhm.
reason could there be for that?
I agree with that. Mhm. There has to be a reason,
Well,
I
no,
feel.
yeah, right.
So that's, Elihu is giving God an out, more or less, that God, is just trying to do a little, as you say, course correction. But that implies that, Job's situation, he is responsible for his situation.
which he still does not want to admit.
Which one of us does?
Well, exactly, exactly. My question has to do with something you just said at the beginning of that, Fred, that God is expected to reward those who do good. Whose expectations are those, and are they realistic?
The people who are doing good expect to be rewarded.
Yeah,
Those are also the covenants that God has made with Israel time and time again.
well,
That's
God's
in it.
covenants have to do with faithfulness.
You will be my people, I will be your God. There's not a reward and punishment implicit in that.
Yeah,
Well, if the people are destroyed, then he's God of nothing.
Oh,
Are those,
that.
destroyed. There's, God still exists.
Does
are
God,
those covenant, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead, Donna.
Are those covenants with individuals though, or are they not with the nation of Israel?
They're with the nation of Israel.
Good point. The collective covenant.
On the other hand, God does seem to deal with Israel and with Job for that matter, if we think about it as a, in a collective sense. When God wanted to punish Job, he killed all his children. When God wanted to punish David, he, punished his generations.
So here's my question. Do we know that God killed all of Job's children?
No.
Well, somebody did. The tent fell
Satan.
down.
Right. Somebody did.
Something did. And in this theology, God is responsible for everything that happens.
Well, right. According to that worldview, that's not, though, my question. My question is, do we know that God did that? Or is that an assumption?
Satan did it, because God, it's pretty clear from the text that God gave permission for Satan to go and do anything he wanted to Job beyond killing him. And, so Satan went ahead and killed his children.
Right. So did God do that, or did Satan do that?
Satan did it with God's permission.
God allowed it to happen. Whoever actually waved the sword is moot. That's 35 chapters ago, so I don't remember.
But my question still is, do we know that?
It's part of the story.
It's part of the story.
Stage set for the story.
What's that, Ray?
I would say it's the stage set for the story.
It's the stage
It
set
is
for the story.
Yeah.
But do we take that as gospel truth that God did that? If this is a mythological story,
what you do.
what do we think?
Well,
think-
here is
let me
here
get-
is
let-
the skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch
Yeah.
out your hand and strike his flesh. The Lord said to Satan, very well, then he is in your hands, but you must spare his life.
Absolutely, that's what the text says. But
Do we believe this? I mean, let me just jump frame of reference. We are 2 weeks past Hurricane Ian. And a lot of families, a lot of homes, a lot of properties, a lot of cattle, whatever. All of Job's wealth would have been destroyed in that. Did God do that? Who
great,
said? And
great question.
yeah, but I think it's the same question that we're asking here.
Yep,
If-
it is. It is. And I know that in this worldview in which Job and his buddies exist, that's the assumption. My question is that accurate about God? And how do we know? Do we?
can't know. We can only have our own theologies.
Mhm. Based on,
Education, life experience. You know, I
Like
go
alligators,
on
so
bike
there's
rides
water
where there are people who, when a storm comes up, pray for a hedge of protection around them
sure.
and, you know, expect that to act, you know, to happen.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, so they have, you know, that's their theology, that's their worldview.
Mhm.
And if they don't get struck by lightning, it confirms their worldview.
Yeah.
It works just as
Exactly.
well as tiger repellent in Manhattan.
Love
Yes.
So
So
I'm going to keep asking this question. We don't have to answer it right now, but as we move forward through the rest of the book, I'm going to keep asking that question. You know, that is the narrative premise, right? We have those couple of prose chapters at the beginning of Job, then it's all this poetry, this, dramatic monologues, and then we'll come back to prose at the end. So this frame that's set out, definitely, and there's no question, exactly what you said, Fred. The text is very clear that, God says to Satan, have at it, do what you will. My question is, does that mean that that's what God did? And again, we can't answer that right now. We may never be able to answer it, but that's, I think, the question that with which we're meant to wrestle as we go through this.
I am reminded of the statement. I forget who it was that proved it, but he was considered as bright as Einstein in his day, and ended up with Einstein at Princeton. But you cannot prove the validity of a system from within the system itself. We cannot prove the validity of our theology, until we can step outside that. And really, that's, that is where we place God, outside of all of this.
Good.
So that he does have the ability to.
Well, Kimosabe, watch the word we.
Oh, I love this group so much.
There's guilt by association, Ray. You will be punished just.
I missed that. You aimed, but I didn't hear it.
I said
No, I
there's
would say
guilt by
it's guilt.
association.
Okay, well, that's fine. I'll take it. What I'm going to say, though, is I think we keep tripping on the stage set, which is this God and Satan dualism, that it's part of this story. This is the way this myth is framed. Yes. Now, if we just started with a man from Hurricane Ian who lost his 6 children, his wife, his cattle, his house, and ended up with welts, yes, on the dung heap. Where would we take that story, and how would we approach it if we didn't have that framing? And I think that is the story we're all left with. The guy in the wake of Hurricane Ian, not Job and the tent collapse.
Beautiful.
At Satan's hand. But all of us are left with the unspeakable tragedies and losses that come along in our lives. They really do. And yet we don't have to posit a good and evil spirit to actuate that, to make it happen.
We don't even need a disaster. If you listen to some people, the reason people are poor is it's their own fault. They don't work hard enough. They don't, they don't get an education. They don't open a savings account.
So that's listening to some people. And the question that I always want us to consider, and again, if people don't feel comfortable sharing this out loud, I totally get that. But I hope that we'll each think about this, is what do we think about that? Yes, some people think that if you're poor, you deserve it. Some people think that if your house got blown away by Ian, you must have done something wrong. That's some people. What do we think? Going back to Jesus, but who do you say that I am? Who do we, what do we think? And again, we don't need to answer that right now, and perhaps can't, but I hope that we'll think about that. I would love, just watching the clock, I would love to finish. I knew it was aspirational to think we could do 3 chapters, but look, if we finish this little bit, we will have done 2, and that's fabulous. Would someone like to read the end of chapter 36 for us, verses 24 to 33? Maybe someone who hasn't read yet today.
Okay.
Thank you, Ellie.
Remember to extol his work, of which mortals have sung. All people have looked on it, everyone watches it from far away. Surely God is great, and we do not know him. The number of his years is unsearchable. For he draws up the drops of water, he distills his mist and rain, which the skies pour down and drop upon mortals abundantly. Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds, the thunderings of his pavilion? See, he scatters his lightning around him and covers the roots of the sea. For by these he governs peoples. He gives food in abundance. He covers his hands with the lightning and commands it to strike the mark. Its crashing tells about him. He is jealous with anger against iniquity.
Thank you, Ellie.
Does this mean that whenever God's mad, we have a thunderstorm?
What I thought when I was a little girl, for sure.
Sure.
My mother always said it was the gnomes playing bowls up and down the Hudson Valley.
Devil's bowling alley.
Rip Van Winkle rolling the rain barrel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds? I think this poetry here is lovely. Surely God is great, and we do not know him. The
That's
number of his years is unsearchable. What do you think about this?
Well, I like that part, except where he gets to the end and suggests that the striking of the lightning is anger against iniquity.
Yep.
I mean, it,
What does the footnote say?
Let's see.
C and the D.
See, Hebrew, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Here we go again. Yep. And let's look to see, let's look at that Hebrew. He judges people, he gives food in abundance, he covers his hands with the lightning and commands it to strike the mark. Its noise declares his presence, the cattle also concerning what is coming up. Now that's interesting. God commands the lightning to strike the mark. Does that mean God destroys with the lightning? Hard to know. Meaning of Hebrew uncertain.
I would interpret that to mean, he uses lightning the way the Greeks thought, Zeus did.
Well, and I was thinking the same thing in verse 33 there, he's jealous with anger against iniquity, and that's very much an anthropomorphized God.
Even the cattle can tell what's going on.
Yeah.
Is that a rebuke of why are you questioning this? Even cows know what's going on with this.
It's a moot question.
Oh,
Yay.
that was utterly bad, Ray.
We're gonna milk this.
Talk about guilt by association. We're all. Oy.
Folks, I have to leave at this point, but I really enjoy it thoroughly. And
Does anybody have any last insights about this? We can always revisit these last verses as we move into chapter 37 next week.
I'm sorry we have to leave it because it is beautiful poetry.
It is. Well, if I can remember, or if one of you can remind me, I'll make a note and hopefully I'll have a prayer of remembering. We can start here and then push forward next time.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to stop the recording.